Good morning, everyone. I hope that people can hear me, that I'm audible enough. I would like to first, start off by introducing myself. My name is Wandile Kasibe. I am the Public Programs Coordinator at Iziko Museums of South Africa. I will be the MC for today's program. And I just would like to acknowledge, I think, first the presence of the Chair of Council, Advocate Solomons, and the executive directors and colleagues who are here, and also our speakers, the panelists. But of course, I will not be doing the official welcome. That official welcome will be done by Advocate Solomons. But before we start with that, we will observe a moment for the singing of the South African National Anthem. I shall now hand over to our communications team, Institutional Advancement, to assist us with that aspect of the program. Thank you. Thank you very much to the Institutional Advancement team for playing the national anthem. I shall now hand over to Advocate Solomons to do the official welcome. Thank you very much. Hand over to you, Advocate. Thank you.
Thanks, Wandile. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Welcome all to this commemoration of Human Rights Day in 2021 with the Iziko Museums. During our so-called new normal, which is the era of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've an esteemed panel of contributors, I'd like to call them, patriotic South Africans, Reverend Chris Nissen, who's got a long history in the affairs of society, and is currently a human rights commissioner in South Africa. Kgotsi Chikane, who's a lecturer at WITS. Ms. Mohau Pheko, who's a lawyer, author, politician, and commentator. We are looking forward to your perspectives this morning, colleagues. We are having this commemoration, I'd like to call it, almost a year or more than a year since the declaration of our total lockdown due to the pandemic. This period was, and I would argue still is, underpinned by various human rights related issues. From in Cape Town, how the authorities dealt with the homeless, especially at the camp in Strandfontein. Issues around how the authorities dealt with SASSA beneficiaries at the offices in Bellville. Issues around how the police dealt with demonstrators. And then there were various court cases where people took the state to the court to court around supposed human rights transgressions. It is my contention that the human rights as enshrined in our constitution is sacrosanct, and our Bill of Rights that we fought hard for over a number of years is non-negotiable. And for me, human rights embodies the victory of good over evil. And ordinary South Africans should celebrate the fact that these hard-fought rights, many died for, many went into exile for, and many paid the ultimate sacrifice. So we need to celebrate, and we need to guard these rights, and we need to insist on getting these rights. As Iziko Museums, we have a few exhibitions in the human rights arena that you might be interested in to view, to visit, or interact with. One of these is the Unshackled History, the wreck of the San Jose slave ship at the Slave Lodge. There's an exhibition called Under Cover of Darkness, the story of 12 enslaved women. The Aluta Continue exhibition that talks about the 1976 uprisings with a particular focus on the Western Cape and the role that people from this area played during that period. The Western Cape is said to have had the second highest numbers of deaths recorded during that period. We've got the Tata Madiba exhibition. It tells the story of the father of our nation, and it gets done in different fashions. You might be interested to go and see that. And then a very interesting exhibition called This Song Is For. It's a collection of songs chosen by survivors of rape. When the pandemic struck, it affected various sectors in society, both in South Africa and over the world, harshly, including museums. Many museums had to close, including this one. We had to have reduced hours when we opened again. We've got diminished visitors. We need to find other ways to exhibit. We had huge losses of income, including donations. People didn't have the kind of resources to share with institutions like museums. We now need to find innovative ways to do business, including how to showcase what we have at our museums. And we need to do it online. We need to raise funds to keep the operation going because our grants are being cut significantly. As we know, our country is facing a huge financial crisis. So partnerships will be the key, and we are keen to engage anyone who wants to partner with us or donate to the museum. You're welcome to either contact me, the CEO, or to Carol Ann Davids, who's in charge of that aspect of the museum business. Finally, I'd like to, on behalf of my fellow council members, to thank the staff of the museum for going the extra mile under these trying circumstances. And we want to thank those who continue to support the museum. Please feel welcome. And we look forward to hear from our guests. I'm looking forward to hear from them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate, for those very beautiful words. I just wanna say that this day is commemorated on the 21st of March of every year, following the Sharpeville massacre that took place in 1960, where the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, PAC, under the leadership of the giant of the South, Robert Sobukwe, led the march against the carrying of passes in Sharpeville. And today we really, have this conversation to answer, I think, to ask a simple but rather a complex question. What does Human Rights Day mean in the times of COVID-19 and post-apartheid South Africa? And as the advocate has already alluded, we have very, should I say, great speakers or panelists this morning, and who will take us through and help us unpack this question. And we have Reverend Chris Nissen, Kgotsi Chikane, and Ms. Mohau Pheko. The order of the program, as it is at this point, we are going to start with Reverend Nissen. And after he has spoken, then we will then move on to Mr. Kgotsi Chikane. And after Kgotsi has spoken, then we will then move to Ms. Mohau Pheko. And after Ms. Mohau Pheko, then we'll open a space for discussion, questions and answers and comments and feedback from everyone. And after that session, then we will have closing remarks from the speakers. And after the closing remarks from the speakers, Dr. Bongani Ndlovu, who is the Executive Director, Co-Functions of IZICO, will then do the vote of thanks. And after the vote of thanks, then we will close, the program. And for those who would like to then ask questions during the questions and answers, you have two options. One is to raise your hand. I think we all have the bar at the bottom of our screens where you can raise your hand, or you can type in the chat, and then I'll be able to, as I facilitate the program, be able to reflect what's in the chat and also notice those who'd like to ask questions. And I hope that the program is clear as I have outlined. And I should also just remind everyone that the umbrella theme for this year's Human Rights Day is the year of Charlotte Maxeke, promoting human rights in the age of COVID-19. And that's the umbrella theme, but under that we have a sub-theme: what does Human Rights Day mean in the times of COVID-19 and post-apartheid South Africa? I shall now hand over to Reverend Chris Nissen. I have been informed that he may not be able to put up his video, but he will be able to, to use audio instead of putting up his video. So I don't know if Commissioner, if you are ready, you can just indicate, and I will now hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you, Program Director, fellow panelists, Advocate Solomons, and council members, staff of IZICO. Thank you so much. My apologies, I have miscalculated my time because I went to the funeral of one of our stalwarts, Thomas Jansen, one of our first mayors post-95 in Villiers-Dorp. And so I'm traveling back to Cape Town, and I hope that I'll be able to stay online until I get to my home. Nevertheless, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for arranging this. And I'm sure that today we understand that the human rights that we celebrate today did not fall from the sky. It came with blood, sweat, and tears, and many men and women paid their lives and sacrificed their future for what we have today as what is enshrined in Chapter 2 of the Constitution, namely the Bill of Rights. I bring greetings to you from the South African Human Rights Commission. It's really indeed a privilege for us to share the platform with my fellow panelists and also with you as the museum. I must say Friday, the Nelson Mandela Museum. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so we can hear you, Commissioner. We can hear you. You may proceed.
Hello, can you? Oh, thank you so much. With the Nelson Mandela Museum, they have celebrated Human Rights Month. Human Rights Day of the at Kunu. The South African Human Rights Commission is a Chapter 9 institution in which we promote, protect, and monitor human rights. We have during the lockdown been declared as an essential service, but
yeah, you seem to be cutting off there, Commissioner. We keep on losing you, but we're able to hear you earlier, and then you cut off. And I don't know, maybe if you would like to get to a spot where there's strong connection, because we seem to have lost you now. Can you hear us, Commissioner? We seem to have lost the Commissioner there. And perhaps if he could indicate if he's able to hear us. It could be because maybe the place that he's in is not strong enough. I think that perhaps if it's fine, we may have to maybe think whether we need to perhaps check with him. Whilst we are checking with him, maybe we can move on to the next speaker. But I must just get an indication. Kaya, are we able to get through to the Commissioner?
I'm just following up on him.
Okay.
Also not trying to get through, but I'll let you know once he's back online. Thanks,
Okay,
Doctor.
because I'm trying to decide whether we should maybe move to Kgotsi and then get back to the Commissioner and the time that it will take for you to get back to us.
I think that will be a good idea, Doctor.
Okay. So let's maybe, if you could just maybe communicate with him that we will then move on to Kgotsi, and then when the Commissioner is available, then he will be there. He will then come after Kgotsi, if that's okay with you and him.
Noted, Doctor.
Thank you, sir. I shall now, colleagues and friends, and move on to Mr. Kgotsi Chikane, who is a lecturer at Wits University, at Wits in Johannesburg. Kgotsi, the platform is yours, sir. Thank you.
Cool, fantastic. Hopefully, I've switched on my video, but I'm not sure if you can see me because you're going to be going through my bio. It's odd because I'm now seeing it and I'm reading it as I'm talking, so it's a bit of a jarring experience. So I just want to say thanks to the Zika Museums for reaching out and allowing me to speak on such an important and powerful day. I think I've been given about 10 minutes. I definitely won't speak that long because I don't like hearing my own voice for that long. And I was hoping I would speak after the Commissioner because I was really interested to hear what the Commissioner was going to say, because a lot of the stuff that I want to talk about essentially link back to this idea of how do you defend the human rights in our country. And how do we fundamentally think about what the role of citizens are, what our responsibilities are when it comes to defending human rights in the country? And a lot of my work, at least in the past, had focused on there has to be a reconceptualizing around the idea of how we defend human rights, because the way that we've gone about it so far has been a travesty, if I had to be brutally honest about it. There's a book that's going to come out later on this year by Caesar and Mpofu Walsh. It'll be his second book. Please go buy it. Really interesting guy. And his book is titled The New Apartheid. And one of the arguments that he's making in the book is this idea that apartheid never disappeared. It was just privatized, right? And I don't want to give up too many things in the book, but when we were talking about it and this idea that apartheid didn't disappear, it just got privatized, it got me thinking, well, are we aware of that? And not just simply being aware of saying, well, yes, apartheid's legacy still persists within our society. The legacies of apartheid when it comes to whether it's spatial planning, whether it comes to economic disparity between racial groups, gender, et cetera, we're well aware that the legacy of apartheid has lasted post-democracy. What I don't think we've really figured out is asking the question about whether we have adequately prepared ourselves to challenge these violations of human rights in this new apartheid with new and improved institutions. And this is why I was really interested to hear, and I'm very interested to hear what the commissioner would have said about this, because at the beginning of this, Mr. Solomon made the point that, the Bill of Rights of our country is sacrosanct, right? It's untouchable. It should be something that we can't change, that we have to defend, and that it's not a negotiable item. I might disagree with him slightly, not that we have to renegotiate the human rights of the country or the Bill of Rights in any particular way, but by the fact that our country is in the state that it is in, it means that we have started negotiating what the human rights are in our country. When we talk about that, a basic human right is someone's right to life, right? But if someone's right to life is being stuck, being born into poverty, and most likely dying into poverty, how are we protecting that person's human rights in that situation? Right? When we have the human rights around access to particular services, so like this notion that we have progressive human rights, when you still live in a country where the majority of the country, and not kind of a majority, the vast majority, 60% of the country, are living underneath the upper bound poverty line, what does that mean for how we're preserving human rights? I often have an issue with the Constitution. I was on a talk, not a talk, but I was part of this event that happened on Wednesday around a lot of stalwarts from the past came out with a really amazing statement on defending the Constitution. And I was having a debate with a friend of mine, and the question was, are we constitutionalists, right? Are we going to sit back and say the Constitution is a sacrosanct document when we know fundamentally that the institutions that the Constitution has created haven't fundamentally changed our country's circumstances? So when we sit and think about human rights, 20 plus years after democracy, when we think and talk about human rights and how we should defend them, the first question we have to ask is, have we even succeeded with defending them in the first place? And I think once we have that open and honest conversation, that indeed the vast majority of South Africans have their human rights stripped away from them every single day. Once we start the conversation from that basis, I think we can do interesting things going forward. And we can start planning about how we go about things going forward. And those are the two things that I want to talk about, right? The first is talking about the status quo of the country and how we need to understand that the status quo of our country entails that we've already renegotiated our Bill of Rights. We have opened up our Bill of Rights to be misinterpreted, to be interpreted in ways that fundamentally go against the well-being of our citizens in this country. And the second point is, because I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, I don't know where that phrase comes from, but I also want to give us an idea of how we build forward and how we renegotiate how we defend our Bill of Rights. So we live, as many people know, in a very unequal country, fundamentally unequal. I always joke around with my friends that since my early teens, when I was still in high school, right, since about 2008, 2009, I have not experienced any form of positive economic growth in this country. And I really want you to kind of sit on that There are people in this country who have started grade 1, who have finished matric and have now entered university, and they've never experienced the sensation of an economic boom in the country. Yes, there's a few highlights. Sporting events give us those highlights. But we have an entire generation who are consistently told, a youthful generation consistently told that you will most likely be stuck in youth unemployment, right? For the vast majority of your youth, right? You will not be able to gain skills because you're unemployed, right? But there's this expectation that when the country fixes itself, that we'll have this mass amount of young people skilled and ready, right? What does that mean for someone's livelihood in the long term? We live in a country that is, since I was in Kgotsi even, since 97, when we took over the title from Brazil, we've lived in the most unequal society in the world, whether it is income disparities, whether it is wealth disparities. We have been the most unequal society and country on this planet for the past 20 plus years. So you have an entire generation that exists in that world. And as I said earlier, you have an entire generation who, I use this phrase in my book. I say there's two groups of young people. There's three, but I won't mention the third one. But there's two groups of young people. There's born frees in the country, right? Born frees, young people who are given that belief that they can strive and they can do something better. If they work hard enough, the society will open up for them. And I say, indeed, born frees exist in our society, but the vast majority of young people in our country are actually born into bondage, right? This idea that you will be born into poverty and you will die in poverty. And that is the future of the vast majority of South Africans that we face. Now, South Africans are a very popular country, not popular in the sense of people like us, but in the sense of that we are happy and we are vibrant and we're a society that loves, that we give, and we have rich cultures. But that means nothing if your livelihood isn't able to match the culture that you want to bring out. It means nothing if your basic human rights are constantly being denied to you every single day. Now, people will come out and say, you know, we've done a lot since 1994, and indeed we have done enough, but that's it. We've just barely done enough. And the situation that we exist in now was just further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Right, so I really wanted to contextualize that to essentially say my starting point when I think about human rights is that they've already become negotiable. We've already lost the plot on how we defend human rights. And I think my fundamental critique of why the Constitution doesn't remain as sacrosanct as it should is because the institutions that were created to ensure that this situation doesn't happen have clearly failed because we're now in that situation. I believe in the Chapter 9 institutions. I think the Chapter 9 institutions are first line of defense against human rights abuses in this country, right? But what do you do in a world where for the past 10 years, every single Chapter 9 institution has been systematically defunded? I don't know about the last year if something changed, but I do know for the past 10 years, all our Chapter 9 institutions have been systematically defunded. When you live in a society where that can happen, then you have to expect that we're now negotiating our human rights. We're negotiating and becoming a lot more lenient when we are able to say that as citizens will allow the first line of defense against human rights violations in our country to be underfunded, delegitimized in various different aspects, and essentially kicked to the curb in certain respects. Sometimes for really good reasons, but that's another political discussion for another day. So it brings me to the point of when we think about human rights, when we think about the sacrifices that people made in the past, when we think about the work that the stalwarts and the blood and the sweat and the deaths that were given to protect, to create this country that we have, there is now a responsibility on us to now reconceptualize what it means to defend human rights in this country, to reconceptualize our institutions that were designed in 1994 to protect against this, but we've now clearly seen in this new privatized apartheid, whatever you want to call it, are ill-equipped to deal with the current challenges that we face. And now we could go, I could wax lyrical about all my different suggestions that are all hypothetical and theory-based in different ways, but at the core of it, there's two things that we have to do, and my two parting words, is that you can't sleepwalk. There's too many South Africans in our country who are sleepwalking, and we saw that during the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic, the clearest thing that it showed me was that There's an entire population of our society that can continue with their everyday lives, whilst the vast majority of South Africans suffer. And that has become normalized. We can sleepwalk through the challenges and the issues that we face as a country. We can normalize the injustices of the country because we can sleepwalk through them. And there's a need for us as citizens to wake up those individuals who are sleepwalking. When students are protesting on the streets, essentially saying that we are being denied access to higher education. And when you know in our country, if you get a university degree and you get a job, it is the quickest way out of poverty. There's no quicker way to get out of poverty than that. But if you tell someone that if you work really, really hard, you can get yourself out of poverty, but you can't get your degree because you're stuck in poverty, that contradiction, people can no longer sleepwalk through. So that's the first thing, that we need to create a way of waking people up. And the last thing is that we need to be brave enough to ask the tough questions, to essentially say what institutions are working and what are not. I fundamentally think that our political system is fundamentally flawed. I think our proportional based system is fundamentally flawed and is fundamentally contributing to the violation of human rights in this country every single day. And we now need to have a very stern conversation about whether our political system and the institutions that are built within it are actively protecting the citizens, and if not, should we change it? Now, I don't want to sound too dramatic about this in any particular way, but we will be having this call around how we can think about reorganizing our political system. And I think every young person needs to stand up and have a say in that. I don't particularly care if it is a constituency-based system, a proportional representation, or there's individual people who can run for government. What I do realize is that our constitution, though beautiful and amazing, has somehow failed us as citizens because of disparities that we have. It's too easy to blame individuals. It's too easy to say, well, we have a lousy president and that's why things have gone wrong. Or we had a lousy president before and that's why things have gone wrong. Or our particular politicians just aren't focused on the cause. It's too easy to say that. That allows us to sleepwalk. And I think a fundamental conversation needs to happen around moments like these when we commemorate the past, around are we brave enough to say we might have been wrong with what we designed in the past and maybe there's a need to redesign something for the future. So those would be my provocative words for this morning. And I think I've hit my 10 minutes now, which I didn't think I would do. But if we had to leave this talk, the 3 points I would say is we now live in a country where our human rights have become negotiable. That for me, that has now become extremely apparent. We live in a country where too many people sleepwalk through the injustices and they need to wake up. And I think we need to be brave enough to ask the tough questions of, if our constitution as it stands is not capable of defending us the way we imagined that it would, then we need to have the tough conversation of what institutions can we change and rework in order to make sure those protections are entrenched. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that really thought-provoking presentation, Kgotsi. And the provocative questions. I think you've put it in such a beautiful way, and asking, I think, challenging society or challenging us in this country to look at how COVID-19 has exacerbated the issues that we have, I think, put across. And I think that's a very, very important issue for us to chew on as we move on with this discussion. Now, I am, I've been informed that I think that the commissioner is back. And if I could just get an indication if he can now connect, and I would like to hand over the platform to Commissioner Nissen. If he's unable to connect, oh, there he is. Thank you, Commissioner. Welcome back, and sorry for your difficulties earlier on. So the platform is yours, Commissioner. Thank you very much.
Program Director, I would humbly ask that you take the next speaker, because I'm about 5 minutes away from my house, and the problem that I have is I'm on my phone and the phone doesn't stop ringing, and that's my problem that I have, because my phone has become a public box. So please, Program Director, I'll be joining after that. I'll be 5 minutes, but if the next panelist could take the floor. Thank you, Program Director.
No problem. No problem, Commissioner. I think, thank you very much for alerting me to that. Now we shall now move on to Ms. Mohau Pheko. I believe that she is also in at this point. I would like to hand over to her. And I was also made aware of the fact that load shedding might affect her, but I'm glad that she's still with us here. So Ms. Mohau Pheko, the platform is yours, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Marks 61 years of the Sharpeville Langa massacre. Without it, the apartheid and colonial regime would never have been exposed, nor would this struggle have been internationalized. It was a Black Monday, and the stench of death was everywhere. The PAC status campaign raised the consciousness of African people to assert themselves as people of value, people of human dignity. Professor Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, 61 years ago, led a peaceful, positive action campaign against the past laws. In Sharpeville, 20,000 people came. In Langa, 30,000 people came. And then on the 30th of March, another 60,000 people came out demanding the release of those who had been arrested during the positive action campaign. And in sentencing the PAC leaders, the magistrate said not only was it your objective to fill the jails, but you intended to paralyze trade, industry, and the economy of the country in order to force the government to change its laws. Indeed, in one day, the stock exchange fell by 600 million pounds. This positive action campaign had the ability to bring about the liberation of the African people in that one day. If it wasn't for the rescue of the US banks to the tune of $300 million, we would be liberated much, much earlier than 1994. In response to the magistrate, Sobukwe said, amongst many things, we believe in one race only, the human race, to which we all belong. The history of that race is a long struggle against all restrictions, physical, economic, and spiritual. Between 1919 and 1960, there were 21 massacres of Africans in this country. What is significant about Sharpeville is that its ultimate aim was the seizure of political power for the indigenous African people from the whites who had dispossessed them. A historical background, I think, is really important to this Sharpeville Uprising Day, because it is often erased, it is revised and reduced to an ahistorical generic Human Rights Day, which it is not. Many people died for this day. I want to thank Iziko Museums of South Africa for hosting a rather complex topic. I enter this conversation by framing it in the debate of international human rights standards as a foundation for the right to protect. I think in this frame, it states that states have an obligation to protect their populations from the worst atrocities on the basis of international human rights precepts. But what does it mean for a state to have a duty to protect human rights? There's no single uncontested answer to this question. And if we examine this notion as a state's ability to stop third parties from depriving individuals an access to the objects of their human rights, then in the context of COVID-19, how has South Africa used the right to protect its citizens? I mean, this is a question I think we have to ask. The 21st of March, 1960, Sharpeville Uprising symbolizes the violence of a state that was unwilling to protect the rights of those who intended to politically and economically restructure the state towards social transformation. 61 years later, COVID-19 has exposed the dysfunctional construction of democracy. And I think it is an acid test for a weak and corrupt state confronted by a virus that became a perfect marriage designed to exploit its fragility. South Africa has succumbed to an unprecedented standstill. It is an alarm bell for a state that has ignored a mountain of problems, an untransformed system of government, further eroded for years by a rapacious, elite, criminal malfeasance and neglect of both social and physical infrastructure, and insufficiently providing for its citizens. Even prior to the virus, South Africa was faced with economic instability. This was witnessed through the systemic demise of the public health system, fraught with economic, political, governance, and long-standing issues. More significantly, the lockdowns imposed have triggered an economic collapse. We are seeing a domino effect in the loss of jobs, both in the small businesses that are dying, large companies and corporations that are retrenching in the mining sector, in the banking sector, and the state-owned enterprises are in complete freefall. It is not just the scale of the job losses, I think, that is concerning. It is the speed in which this is happening. When we expect the state to protect its citizens, the one thing we are not talking about enough is the human security crisis: food, water, energy, and health. The rise in the cost of food, in particular staple foods like rice and wheat that we have in our bread, is rapidly rising. Yet we have a state-owned competition commission which consistently protects the private sector interests and anti-competitive behavior against consumers. With increasing human security crisis, the riots for service delivery are going to rise, the cost of living, wage demands are rising, fees must fall, increase in crime, and the othering of those who are not South Africans is becoming a real national security threat. People are on the edge. There's a collapse of confidence in experts, in science and institutions. And there's a complete cognitive dissonance. For decades, people have been told the South African Constitution is the best in the world, yet that is not delivering a different social and economic outcomes. This translates into increased skepticism of democratic institutions like the courts. International human rights instruments speak of the state's responsibility to protect, yet it is the same state that reinforces a national security crisis, the rising tensions within the country, the failure of the free market ideologies that have completely undermined democracy and diminished social protections for ordinary people. And COVID has elevated a contemporary crisis of governance that calls into question even the legitimacy of the state. The impact of these crises combine your COVID, your economic, your unemployment, your social crisis, challenges us, I think, to examine the political and economic elite compacts of power. This forces us to frame traditional constructs such as what is a state, what is sovereignty, what is political identity. If it is clear that the state has abdicated its obligation to provide for its citizens human rights, then it is critical to examine the role of the state as it relates to people living on the margins, to women, to unemployed youth. And what does citizen mean in the context of persistent denial of human rights? Can we really say that we are citizens? A primary feature of the COVID virus is the marketization of state functions. This is not only with regard to tenderpreneurs of state assets, but also with core policy and legislative functions, which are no longer transparent. They're being outsourced unilaterally to a few ministers with very little or small oversight by Parliament. In the context of this marketization of governance, what does democracy and participation mean for those who have and are outside the centers of power? Whose right is the state protecting? The burden of care during the COVID virus is pushing those on the margins into the most degrading, hazardous forms of survival. This inevitably leads to further fragmentation and deepening conflict. The state does not protect women against the impact of COVID. The narrative of the marginalization and exclusion of women is played out unabated in the increasing violence that we see. We see it in persistent structural poverty and growing inequalities. Constructs such as the state, sovereignty, political identity, and human security are beginning to reflect patterns of power, control, and exploitation over women and people living on the margins in very unsavory ways. The shift from democratic engagement on what is in the public interest is more focused now on how to secure faster gains for the private sector and capital to promote investment and foreign exchange earnings. Increasingly, though, the internal checks and balances on this to safeguard the interests of the poorest are discarded. Where did, for example, the 500 billion rand go to? How much of that went to the poor and those living on the margins? Today, the ruling elite operate the state by appropriating the state machinery to maintain unequal power relations. State power, human rights, and politics has little now to do with democracy and development. Patronage prevails instead of legitimacy and accountability, and these are human rights. COVID has revealed a multiplicity of micro-powers. Everybody is making decisions in small pockets. And this is increasing economic inequalities suffered by women in particular. It is showing up inequalities in social and natural resource management, the undemocratic power relationships between men and women at the private, at the domestic, at the reproductive levels are on the rise, as well as these same relationships, which are becoming more and more skewed and dysfunctional at the public, at the political, and the productive levels. At the same time, we see the deepening stress on the relationship with the state, on political participation and citizenship. The one thing is that COVID has reminded us of the necessity to bring back the discourse of oppression and discrimination. COVID has also revealed the ambivalent nature of the state to exercise its obligation to protect its citizens' human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pheko. Wow, that was really mouthful. That was a thought-provoking presentation. I'm sure that we've noted, I think, a couple of questions, and I think that it's important the view that you are presenting, that indeed COVID-19 has revealed multiplicity of micro powers, and at the center of that is the fact that women remain unprotected by the system. And I think that's one of the things that I'm sure that we'll be able to discuss this morning. I just want to get now an indication from Kaya if the commissioner is in. If the commissioner can be able to connect, I would like to hand over the platform to him. If there are still challenges there, then we can maybe get an indication from the commissioner. Commissioner, are you able to connect?
Yes.
Oh, great, great. I will not
Yes,
waste.
I'm able to. Can you?
Thank you. I think we can see you, Commissioner. It's good to see your face. So I shall now, without wasting any time, I will hand over the platform to you. Thank you, Commissioner. I don't know if your mic is as, if you can unmute yourself, Commissioner. We can't hear what you're saying. I'm not sure if it's me, but I can't hear what the Commissioner is saying. If you could just check your microphone so that we can be able to hear what you are saying. Thank you. Yeah, I think technology does these things. We will just maybe give a few seconds whilst the Commissioner is trying to get the microphone because I can't seem to hear anything on my side, and I hope that I'm actually audible. I don't want to be speaking to myself here. I hope that people can hear me. So now we will just maybe a few seconds. I see that the Commissioner is trying to get to connect again, and we'll just give a few seconds before we open the platform for a discussion. And I want to assume that we've people have been writing down their questions, because we are going to open that platform for that discussion after the Commissioner has done with his presentation. Maybe we should then maybe proceed to the next part. It really would be nice if we could have the discussions or the discussion after the Commissioner, because there may be also issues that he may want to address before we get to the to the questions and answers or to the discussion. Let me perhaps maybe move on with the program then, and then the Commissioner will then indicate, or Kaya will indicate to us when the Commissioner is available. Let's first take maybe the first, if anyone would like to ask a question. As I indicated earlier, we've just heard, I think, two powerful speakers this morning, and we will still gonna hear from the Commissioner. And from what has been presented to us this morning, who would like to ask or pose a question? I see in the chart that somebody was, I think it's from Deborah. I think individual constituency MPs would make a huge difference with accountability, so that as in the past in South Africa, people would vote in their own constituency for their own MP, who would have to deal with both local and national issues. I think that's more of a comment. And then the another comment that came before this is, how far do our belief system and ideology perpetuate the status quo? And another comment is, excuse my lamentable ignorance, but what are Chapter 9 institutions, please? I think these are more of comments than questions. Let's open the floor for questions, colleagues. If anyone would like to ask a question whilst we are waiting for the Commissioner to connect. Are there any questions from anyone? Okay, I'm not seeing anything else in the chart. I'm not seeing anything in the chart. I just I see Kgotsi would like to, his hand is up. Kgotsi, please, you are welcome to speak.
Yeah, no, I just thought, I know one of the comments, hopefully you guys can hear me clearly, around, let me just find it here, this individual constituency system. And I can briefly touch on that as we wait for the commissioner, if you allow me, Chair.
Yes, Kgotsi, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's an important conversation to have. I think there should now be a firm belief that the proportional representation that we have in our political system is just not, it isn't working. And not in the sense that people are not allowed to vote, that people aren't allowed to have their representatives in parliament, but that our parliamentary system has now fundamentally failed in its job in ensuring that we can hold people accountable, that we can hold institutions accountable, that we can hold political organizations accountable. And I think there is a very deep, deep need to question our current political system and what type of reforms that take place. Whether a complete constituency-based system would change things, I believe it would, is up for debate. But I do know that the status quo definitely does need to be changed because of the current circumstances that we find ourselves in. So I think that comment is extremely powerful. I think it would be a game changer if we could change it. I think the trouble that we have, and I love my parents and I love the elders and I love the stalwarts, but I think their fight to create the country that we have to an extent has made them blind to the current situation that we find ourselves in. And sometimes there's a need to change the baby that you created and to be willing to change it. And so I think that conversation needs to be had across the country.
Program Director, I'm back again. My apologies. It's Murphy's Law today.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. It's good to have you back. And I was also saying that I was actually speaking to a mic that was on mute. So I really would like to thank you again and welcome you. And thanks for joining us again, Commissioner. And I understand technology can do this thing to us. We rely on it, but sometimes it can disappoint us. And thank you, Kgotsi, for raising that point. I'm sure that we will deliberate more on that after the Commissioner has spoken. Commissioner, the platform is yours. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. I won't go into the introduction, but thank you once again. I think that Kgotsi and Mayor Pheko, I want to thank them both for two reasons. One is that, yes, there's a lot of sleepwalkers. And then thank you, Mayor Pheko, for reminding us the origins of this day. Although Human Rights Day is celebrated with the rest of the South Africa in terms of where we come from, in terms of Chapter 22 of our Constitution, but we need to put this Human Rights Day in perspective. And thank you for reminding us about Sharpeville and the Langa March and all of those things where men and women paid with their lives. The chairperson made mention of a number of incidents during and even though during lockdown level 5 and subsequent all other levels. The South African Human Rights Commission has, in fact, tried to look at the issues because during lockdown, during COVID-19, particularly in the first few phases, a number of rights were suspended. And we're concerned that in suspending those rights, there will be violation and no one will know about it. And including our own offices, we had to close most of them and only had to, we didn't want walk-ins, we had to through emails and through phones and so on. But poor people do not have all of those access. So what we did, we used the mandate of the commission in terms of our act, and we accredited civil society organizations who have been concerned about the potential violation of human rights. And we accredited them in terms of Section 11 of our Act by extending our mandate to them. So throughout the country, we had 550 plus monitors, human rights monitors, that were from all walks of life, all over, and went around and made investigations. They highlighted the violations, they attended to those violations, and brought it under the attention of our 9 provincial offices. Indeed, Kgotsi, what has happened is that COVID-19 has really opened up the fault lines and in fact showed the two South Africas where we live. So in the one part of South Africa, people could sit and isolate, and people could have all the gadgets and all the means and all the space. On the other hand, you have in the township and informal areas, talking about washing of hands. It's possibly an impossible thing because people are going to have one sand tap where people have to go and wash and get the water from. Social distancing in some places, the only time when everybody can be in the house is when they go and sleep. And so there's no even movement for people to sit around and so on. Everybody has to be on the street. In some places, people don't even have yards and children have to play in the streets. So it opened up this inequality in our country, but also this functionality of our society. And so we saw that even at the beginning when the police and alleged police brutality, but also when the police were arresting people when they go and buy bread and when they go and buy electricity because they are not supposed to move and all of those issues. So we've seen the hardships that our people went through during COVID-19, during the first three levels of lockdown. So with the suspension of rights, of course, limited suspension of rights, we also question the command councils and so on and ask them to be lenient on, for example, just issuing fines, because if you have 50,000 people that issue fines, it's 50,000 people that will be sitting with criminal records. And we have been dealing with this with the Minister of Police, and the Minister of Police has spoken to the Minister of Justice on this matter. But on an individual basis, people also felt it at the workplace. In some places, employers use the COVID-19 to get rid of people. For example, people, they will say, you are bringing the virus to our workplace, get out of here. And so even the CCMA had a very difficult time in taking on cases, and cases are behind like more than a year at the CCMA. So employers also use the opportunity to get rid of people and treat people very badly. On the other hand, some people also were forced to come and work. Even the fact that they say that I have been in contact with somebody, they were forced to come and work, and the result is that the whole factory gets affected. All the workers in the factory gets affected. So COVID-19 has opened up the inequality, the fault lines, but at the same time, it showed how the people have become the enemy and not the virus. Despite the president, when he deployed the law enforcement, the armed forces, we've seen the brutality at times that was reported to us, but also that we saw, including when we had to go to the protest rallies and the place of unrest and civil unrest, and where there were violent unrest. We saw Leo, a 9-year-old boy from St. Helena Bay, being shot at close range through this corrugated sheeting in this house in which he was staying. He died 2 weeks later after the assault. We've seen in the past year within the South African Police Services the detention centers, like the cells at the police stations, more than 15 people died, allegedly at the hands of police. We saw in Dooley Township, where people that were, people were just shot at. Young person lost his eye. Young boy lost his eye. So we saw the brutality, and we've raised this with the police at the Portfolio Committee of Police. Question is, after 27 years and after 26 years of democracy and 26 years of the Constitution, and after 25 years of the South African Human Rights Commission, have our people seen the realization of their rights, particularly with regard to socioeconomic rights? Indeed not. Because corruption is one of the key factors that denied people the realization of the socioeconomic rights, from housing, health. Why do people have to stand at 4 o'clock in the morning at day hospitals and hospitals, queuing 4 o'clock in the morning? Why do we see people being hosed down with water, just wanting to renew their disability grants? We've seen the effects of corruption. I've traveled all 9 provinces in this financial year, and I've seen roads that come to an end, bridges that are not fully built, all sorts of things that we see, the effects, the dam being built, but reticulation for people to get water, and people still drink water and collect water with the animals where animals are drinking. We've pit toilets. We've seen that the bucket system is still around. We've seen that there are schools that don't have water and it still have pit latrines, and people's fallen in. So the question is, have the South African people seen the realization of their rights, which was paid in blood and sweat and tears and with the bodies of our people? The answer is no, not at all. There's still a long way to go. Yes, indeed, we can vote, we can travel, we've got a passport, we've got an ID, we can travel, and some of us have all the things in life for us. But one community, it is working better than the other community. When people call in Rondebosch, when they call the city to come and attend to a tree that has fallen, the city council is there immediately. But when you see in Katanga, Ellenvale, you see sewage gushing like a waterfall, and been there for 3 years, and after hundreds and thousands of complaints, nothing happens. And even if you see in Kgotsi, where sewage are going down the streets and you call the municipality and nothing happens, and it can go on for weeks and weeks. So in one sector of society, people are being listened to. In the other sector of society, it does appear there's an attitude of, you can wait until we come. And so it's very important that I think we need to bring a better a consciousness amongst ordinary citizens of South Africa. They must use their vote and use it to change their life in the realization of their rights. Homeless people. We've seen in this last week, the city of Cape Town attacking me personally. And when our monitors were there to make sure that those homeless people rights were not violated. I was there at this campsite. When women came to me after 3 weeks being there and say, we don't have sanitary pads. And when you call the city and ask those who are responsible, they say, oh, our procurement process. I said, but you knew, you built this camp, you knew the people that you're going to bring here. Why didn't you prepare for that? The indignity that people suffered at that camp. Same thing on the other side on the refugees. So we can go on, but clearly, people's rights were violated. And our officers throughout the country has been very hard in trying to address those rights and those violations. We've come a long way. We're positive. We think that we can still push the human rights agenda. But again, and I think it's Kgotsi that mentioned it, that we can't have Chapter 9 institutions that's underfunded and do not have all the capacity to make sure that we fight for the realization of people's rights. COVID-19 has taught us a number of lessons, and indeed a lesson that we cannot be sleepwalkers anymore. And the Khoi San saying, if you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going. If we do not know the sacrifices of Sharpeville, we cannot appreciate where we're going to. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. That was really powerful, and thank you for taking us through. I think or rather reminding us really of the challenges that we face, that as society we face today. And I think that what really cuts across, I think, the different presentations, starting from looking at how COVID-19 has, exposed the inequalities that exist in society today, and also how women remain the victims or continuously victimized or left unprotected by the system. And lastly, the issue of corruption, which basically takes away the socioeconomic rights of citizens. And the question then that remains, having looked at all of this, which is the question that I would like to pose to the panelists, a simple but perhaps a much more complex question: what is to be done? Having looked at all of the challenges and having outlined and brought to our attention the issues that we all experience. There are those who have, there are those who do not have. And there are those who die of poverty, of hunger in our society. And the question that remains, what is to be done? What should we do as society to minimize or to eradicate this problem that seems to put the lives of people at risk? People's lives are hanging in the balance because of the issues that have been discussed here this afternoon or this morning. Now, I would like now to perhaps open that space for us to pose questions and to make comments. And as I indicated earlier on, we have two options to do this. One is you raise your hand and then we'll allow you to speak, or you could type your question in the chat space, or your comment. It doesn't have to be a question. It could be a comment. It could be a reflection. And after that, I will then give again the panelists the time to respond to your different questions. And then they will also do the closing remarks. Now I am looking, I'm waiting if there's any question from anyone. In the chat, I am not seeing anything there. There's, I think Philip is saying, thanks for this critical assessment of current conditions and call to action. Apologies for having to leave. And then Crystal is saying, Senzeni now, what have we done? I see Stembele Harmans, his hand is up. I don't know if there's anyone else who I need to note after Stembele. Mr. Harmans, the platform is yours, sir.
Okay, I think my question is also simple. It's how do we then envisage, the new normal? Because we normally talk of the new normal, because some of the issues that were raised here, because when people talk about the new normal, we sometimes talk as if, that, the old normal was normal. But if we look at the issues that have been raised here, poverty, inequalities, corruption, that was not normal. So then how do we envisage, the new normal? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Armans, for that question. I'm sure that any of the panelists could respond to that question. I think you pose it to everyone, not unless you specifically would like a specific panelist to respond to it. I would like to give the panelists, any of the panelists to respond to that question. It's a very beautiful question. I think it captures really, I think, the concerns around how we go about dealing with these things as the country. There's also another comment, I think, from Advocate Solomons. How can we assist ordinary South Africans to assert their rights without having to engage in expensive litigation? I think that is directed, I think that is for Commissioner Reverend Chris Nissen. I think that is for you. Should I perhaps maybe start with the Commissioner and then Mr. Kgotsi and then Ms. Pheko? Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. Indeed, the Human Rights Commission and Chapter 9 institutions were exactly created to assist the ordinary people, those who cannot afford litigation, because the rich can afford litigation. And the cases that we see coming to the Human Rights Commission are mostly from people that cannot afford legal assistance. But there are also other institutions such as Lawyers for Human Rights, the Foundation of Human Rights, the Legal Resource Center, Legal Aid, a number of those people, but I would suggest that your first port of call should be the South African Human Rights Commission. And the South African Human Rights Commission in the last few years have also seen some real changes in terms of where we're saying that we should not only wait for people to come to us, but we should be going out to people through our advocacy programs and so on. So certainly, advocate, this is your first port of call. And if the Human Rights Commission is not capable of doing it, we need to then take on, or not capable, but if reluctant to do it, we need to take on the Human Rights Commission and say, you've been established precisely to protect the most vulnerable, the poor, and those who cannot afford, legal lawyers, etc. But also the Equality Court. People don't use the Equality Court. You don't have to wait for the Human Rights Commission or lawyer. If you insulted, if you hate speech, or you were called any word, etc., you need to go and you can go to a court, because like the court, you'll have a family court. There's also Equality Court where you can fill in a form and lay your complaint against the person or alleged perpetrator, etc. But certainly, Human Rights Commission is your first port of call. Can I just say, one of the things I omitted to say is that that what we do have in South Africa is a great lack of social cohesion, and that our country has begun to go into what I call tribal, maybe the wrong word, but ethnic politics. And I've just come from East London, for example, in which people feel that they're excluded. They are being told pointedly that you won't get any houses because you are so and so and so. So we need to work on getting back, and especially the issue of the national question, but social cohesion is one of the issues that's also at this point in time breaking apart the South African society. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think the second question, I think, to Kgotsi and Ms. Pheko is, how do we envisage the new normal? Was the old normal? And there's also another comment, I think, from Deborah. I think I will reiterate this one. Excuse my lamentable ignorance. That's what she's saying. But what are Chapter 9 institutions, please? Kgotsi, that's it's your turn, and then after that I will hand over to Ms. Pheko. The questions are: how do we envisage the new normal? Was the old normal? And what is to be done? I think those are questions that are currently on the table. Thank you, Kgotsi. Yeah,
I think the Chapter 9 institutions one was, I think someone answered it quite well. But in essence, in Chapter 9 of our Constitution, there are all these institutions that were created essentially, whether it's the Auditor General, the IEC, the South African Human Rights Commission, the Commission for Gender Equality. I hope I got that right. But all of these are frontline defenses. They're all what we would call quasi-autonomous institutions, but essentially they're independent. And they're meant to protect us as citizens. On the new normal, so I want to understand the question correctly. So either it's the new normal post-COVID, because that's what a lot of people talk about as the new normal, or what the new normal will look like as a better country. So I can answer both really quickly. When people talk about the new normal that's created by COVID, it always frustrates me because nothing has really fundamentally changed, right? So Thabo Mbeki's thesis from the 90s still holds true, that South Africa's two nations in one. And I think the commissioner also reiterated that. Everything that we're saying about people going online, people being able to manage this crisis because they have got access to capital, they've got access to services, they've got access to internet, electricity. All that did is that it gave us a visual explanation or visual way of representing the disadvantages in our country, right? A physical way of saying that even though in a global pandemic, I am still okay, whereas the majority of South Africans just aren't and are constantly exposed to this pandemic. So that new normal, I always say, it's not a new normal. All you're doing is that you're shining a new type of light on the already vast disparities in the country. If we do talk about what kind of new normal can we build, in particular related to, because I can give you many different theories, but on particular with human rights, I think the first one is we need to be able to measure progress differently, right? This idea that the country is constantly trying to achieve economic growth as a way of gauging progress becomes a frustrating conversation, because we now know that even if the country grows economically, right, so even if we get this magical 3 to 5% growth, we now have enough history and data to show us that income inequality increases in such situations. And I think better measurements of progress are needed. I would like the president every single State of the Nation address to essentially say, last year, this is the amount of people who are sitting in poverty. Because of our interventions over the previous year, this is now the new numbers that have reduced of people who are in poverty, right? And what that does is that it restructures government's thinking to not think about generating economic wealth, but about mitigating against the worst effects of lack of development in the country. And there's multiple ways of doing it. A second one, which is slightly controversial, I get that, but just hear me out, which is there's a desperate need to reduce the amount of people who are gaining social protection from the state. That should be a goal of the state. This is not to say that people who need social protection should be kicked off to the curb, but the economic framework of our country should actively say that we should get people off social grants. That should be the purpose, right? That you shouldn't have a social grant for your entire life, right? That the economic environment of your country ensures that there is a way for you to no longer need social protection from the state because your livelihood has gotten to the state where you don't need it anymore, right? People who have health insurance from Discovery are not collecting social grants because they don't need it, right? And there needs to be a push to say we want to reduce the amount, not the amount of money necessarily, but the amount of people on social grants, because we know we've made their lives better. So those are the type of new normal indicators that I think we need to have, and the type of language we need to change towards.
Thank you very much, Kgotsi, for that response. I don't know if Miss Pheko, if she's still with us, if she has not been affected by load shedding. If you're still here with us, ma'am, you are free to also chip in at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for a very interesting and rather complex, I think, conversation. I think that I want to make a couple points. In terms of the new normal, I think it's very, very important for us to decode language. We normalize a lot of things that are extremely abnormal. This is not to say that the previous dispensation was different prior to COVID. But when we start using language like the new normal, what does that actually mean? What are we talking about? So I think that there's a deep need to decode the language that we use around this. And this is an old strategy of consciousness. And of course, we know that the neoliberal agenda will always try to use language that misinforms, a language that in subtle ways wants us to think in a certain way in order to normalize things that are not normal. So I think the first thing in reimagining a new political, a new economic and social discourse is to decode the language. I think that's very, very important. The second part that I want to also deal with in reimagining, because I think that we have to question everything, including the human rights instruments that are increasingly linked to the marketization of governance. I just give an example of the World Health Organization and how it is currently being used during this COVID crisis by powerful nations to project a certain agenda. And we need to be able, I think, to find our own ideological leanings, go back to what we said we were fighting for in the first instance, when we said we wanted to liberate South Africa? What was that language? And many might argue that, well, that's old language. We don't need to go back to the language of oppression anymore. After all, we have an African government in place. But ideological leanings are very, very important. They influence the policy space. They influence the legislative space, and they influence the vision. Coming to the vision now, do we have a common vision as a country? And what is that vision? How do we see ourselves? I mean, 25 years on, we're urbanizing faster than ever. There are more informal settlements. Our public health system is falling apart. We need to go back to the origins of what we were fighting for and begin to ask ourselves, why did we go into this in the first place? What is it that our people need? I then want to go into also the Chapter 9 institutions. I mean, the Chapter 9 institutions are supposed to be the watchdogs of the state. These are supposed to be the watchdogs of the state. Unfortunately, and this is my view, I think that the Chapter 9 institutions are extremely weak. I think that the manner in which even the commissioners are selected is difficult because they are placed in a very ambivalent position of having to fight a state run by some of their own friends or in political parties, and it's very difficult to challenge a state that is at one point friendly towards you, but at the same time you have to oblige it to fulfill its human rights. I think that we have to question everything. We have to challenge our discourse. We have to challenge our paradigms as they stand now in order for us to begin to build a new and fresh consensus on how we move forward. I think that the old consensus is not working. For 25 years, we've tried it. It is not working. It's in fact in free fall. And I think that if we are not able to have conversations like this, which I think are very, very critical and important in many different spaces and a diversity of views, I think that it's going to be very, very critical for us to create more dialogues like this in order to plot a new way forward. Thank you again to Iziko for this really incredible panel, and to my panelists as well.
Thank you very much, ma'am. That was really, I think, important for us, to get that feedback. And I really must say that the issue of the decoding of language, I think, is such a powerful way, really, of looking into this. And now I am seeing that we've passed 12:30, and this was meant to have ended, I think, at about 12:20. And I see there's one last question in the chat, and we will engage that question, and then we'll also do the closing remarks from the speakers, and then the vote of thanks after that. So the question is from Deborah. She's saying, thinking of Charlotte Maxeke, what might she wish for today or be distressed about? And as a Christian activist, how might she view the role of the church today? I think I will ask the three panelists to respond to that question at the same time, to do their closing remarks. And then after that, we'll then move on to the vote of thanks. Thank you very much. I will start with the commissioner, and then Kgotsi, and then Ms. Pheko.
Thank you, Program Director. I just say, Ms. Pheko, you are spot on when it comes to your analysis and your view on the Chapter 9 institutions. Clearly, I mean, people start blaming one person, a group of people for the corruption, but that corruption happened on the watches of the Chapter 9 institutions. And yes, it's very, very fair criticism that you've raised. And these are the kind of things that we really need to act without fear or favor, even if it's with our friends. With regard to the issue about, I mean, I leave for what I think on the issue about religion, and particularly on the churches. One of my colleagues told me the other day that when in 1993, late 93, he reminded me that the church leaders came together and they looked at the Freedom Charter and they said, you know what, we can live with this because this adds to the morality and where we want to go, and then gave their support to the ruling party, current ruling party. Sad to say is that we can no longer think that way, that the ruling party has no longer got that morality to appeal to the support of the churches. But at the same time, the church's voice has become quiet. It is no longer the voice of pre-1994. In fact, there's no voice of the churches anymore. And what has happened in that process, there was a gap that those who wanted to extract the last cent from the wallet of the poor occupied that space. And that's why you see the mushrooming of commercialization of the churches, and the poor in their desperation from sangomas to these churches try to seek answers. And the very institution that needs to be the prophetic voice has gone quiet. And so that is my opinion of it. I think we no longer have the people that can lead, that can stand up, and those voices are quiet. And in the absence of those voices, we found an unaccountability of state institutions and political parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I don't know if you would also like to make your concluding remarks, because we will close after the last speaker.
No, just to say thank you for giving us this opportunity. And as I said to the Nelson Mandela Museum, I also think your institution should also be looking at the South African Human Rights Commission, so that we can also perhaps have a interactive partnership in order for us to also support one another. But this is a very well received from our side, this debate today. I want to thank my fellow panelists. And yes, we will try very hard not to decoding language and conversations. And also at the same time, we will have to work very hard to wake up those sleepwalkers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Kgotsi?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to the Zico Museums. I think these conversations are extremely important. And I think it's the type of conversations that really help gear people forward and help people rethink their own biases, their own things that they've accepted in society. So I want to thank you guys for this amazing event and this amazing talk, and to the panelists. On the quick question, and it'll be my concluding remarks as well, I think Charlotte Maxeke would have been fighting the system. That's the belief. I feel like she would be distressed for a second, and then she would sit back and say to herself, actually, the work needs to be done to change the system. And I think, and what that entails is fighting against people that you previously thought were on your side, and realizing that people who might have been on the same side as you in the past are actually now the new enemy that you need to confront. And I truly believe that she would be the one leading the charge, and I would follow her to the bitter end. On the question of what Christian activists should do, I think the South African Council of Churches has taken a new stance in the past 5 years. And I'm 100% biased because I know my dad sits on the South African Council of Churches, but I think any person who's in any form of church group should ask their church leaders and their religious leaders, are you supporting the actions of the South African Council of Churches? Because the South African Council of Churches at this current state are actively trying to defend this constitution. And I think that would be the one port of call that I would kind of give to people who identify as not just activists, but Christian activists in particular. And I don't want to get into any sort of theological discussion here, but I think that becomes important. That's a simple way. It's a practical way of asking the question, do you support what the South African Council of Churches is doing? And if not, why? Because that council has done a lot of work in the past 5 years or so to both rebrand themselves and really push this message forward. There's something fundamentally flawed in our country. And then my last comment would be, as the commissioner said, it's not just about not being a sleepwalker. It's about how do you make sure that the people who are around you who are sleepwalking through this crisis that we're facing as a country are not just awakened to the crisis that's at play, but become the vanguards of defense against the injustices that are happening. I think that becomes an important point. But again, thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate being on such an amazing platform.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Pheko?
Chair, allow me to thank Iziko once again, I think, for a conversation that I think is going to be linked to many other conversations. I think that it's important for us to recognize that this moment in history is critical for us. It's critical for us because it may be the only moment that comes for a long time after this if we do not take up the opportunity to restructure and to re-engineer the trajectory of our country. We are very fortunate in having amongst the youngest populations in the world. And I think that what's critical is to ensure that they have the space to innovate, to come up with new ideas, and I think to elevate new alternative paradigms, which are really critical. I think we also have to allow them to trespass and not to make dissent something that deserves a rubber bullet, for example. I think that it's really, really important that we allow a space to interrogate, a space to problematize, and a space to dream. And I think that while COVID has had many negative impacts on our society, socially, economically, politically, environmentally, it offers us an opportunity for a rethink. And I think that this is very, very critical for all of us. I think that, of course, we need a new consciousness as well, and a new ways of raising consciousness with each other, being able to reach across the political divide, the economic divide, to begin to share different discourses and paradigms. I think the church has a very important role, and I think it needs to remember that church doesn't happen within the four walls of a building, that church happens outside in our communities. And Jesus went out and he fed the people, he healed the sick. He didn't do this inside four buildings. And I think we need to bring the church out into the society, out to the community again, to bring love again, I think. And this is really important. Once again, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you for those beautiful and powerful words. I must say that I just also would like to say that now I will hand over to Dr. Bongani Ndlovu, who is the Executive Director, Co-Functions. But before I do that, I just would like to, to remind, everyone that there is a video that will be shared on Iziko, Twitter, Facebook, and other social media platforms. It's entitled "Remember Africa, Remember Sobukwe." It's by Kevin Harris. So people can check that that video out when they visit our Twitter, which is basically at iziko _, museums, and then that's Twitter, and then on Facebook it's Iziko Museums of South Africa. People can visit those social media platforms. And one last thing that I would also like to say before we close is that on the 27th of April, and I'm glad that Kgotsi mentioned Sizwe Mpofu. Sizwe will be part of a panel that will actually be organized on Freedom Day, which is on the 27th of April. So I look forward to that discussion. And I also would like to encourage everyone to check our social media platforms for the updates with regards to Freedom Day that's happening on the 27th of April. Now I would like to hand over to Dr. Bongani Ndlovu to do the closing, the vote of thanks. Over to you, Dr. Ndlovu. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. And mine is a very, very simple one. Advocate Solomon, when he officially opened this discussion today, he brought a spotlight on the fact that during COVID-19 lockdowns, a number of human rights that we as South Africans are supposed to enjoy were violated. And then his portal highlighted and made use of a number of examples on how that was done. And that also allowed us to engage with a number of those issues. That was a fair assessment, which also enabled the panelists broader to question his stance and also to open up the discussion. And we thank him for doing that. His notion of a new normal also was an idea that was contested. We thank you, Advocate, for highlighting those issues and for opening up the floor for discussion. Commissioner Nissen, we also like to extend our words of appreciation to the manner in which you brought to our attention on how during lockdowns period and also during the past year, we've seen a violation of human rights by authorities in different levels of the state. You've also brought to our attention the fact that the Human Rights Commission made use of human rights monitors. These are South Africans and citizens who are operating throughout South Africa. During this period, you argued, South Africa witnessed a world. One, on the other hand, is very rich, and one, on the other hand, is very poor. One is privileged, the other one is less privileged. So this exposed the inequalities in our societies. You pointed out that ours was a society where human rights were ignored, though they were embedded or are embedded in the Constitution. And you pointed out that our society cannot afford to see such violations. But what struck me in your assessment is that during this period, corruption was one and continues to be a key factor that denies South Africans of their basic human rights. This is an honest assessment. You've challenged also, and you indicated that the Human Rights Commission will continue to work with institutions like Iziko Museums, the Nelson Mandela Museums, to highlight human rights that South Africans and also human beings are supposed to enjoy. Ntate Kgotsi, you were very, very provocative in your approach, and we highly appreciate that, Ntate Chikane. You've argued that given the state of our country presently, there is a need to renegotiate the notion of human rights. Ours is a fundamentally unequal society. And you've pointed out to the fact that we are experiencing the new apartheid. Your parting words, we can't sleepwalk, was very profound and powerful. And it also was echoed by panelists during the discussion period. You also pointed out to the fact that our constitution has failed us, not that it's perceived that it has failed us. You are very clear in your assertion that it has failed us, and that you pointed out that there's a need to redesign our models. And we hope that with this provocation, we as South Africans will be able to make use of them and move forward. Mohau Pheko, as usual, you gave us a solid background of why are we speaking or referring to the human rights today. Without Sharpeville and also Sharpeville massacre, we wouldn't be referring to Human Rights Day as we understand it today. And we're very clear that at times we seem to underplay or to downplay rather the role that the PAC's positive action played in the history of human rights and also the Human Rights Day. And that the PAC's positive action campaign was an attempt to bring to the fore the realization that ours was a state that was governed, and that was strongly designed to oppress the majority of South Africans. 1960, therefore, symbolized the violence that the state exercised to oppress Black people and the poor. And you compare that experience to the experience of many South Africans last year, wherein you argued the state failed to protect its citizens. 61 years later, South Africans and the poor were experiencing poverty, unemployment, and you were very, very clear in your assertion that there has been consistent denial of human rights during the past few months. And you argue, whose right is the state protecting? And that is a question also that we need to take home and also think about, because you've argued that women are not protected in this country or by the state. And there are a number of people who are unemployed, young people in particular. So whose rights is the state protecting? And we thank you for provoking us and for making us think very hard about the rights that we think we are enjoying. To all our panelists, we thank you collectively for bringing to the fore issues that we need to contend with, and then for bringing to our attention actions that we need to begin to take in order to see to it that South Africans enjoy their basic human rights. And then if we still have those rights, I would like also to take this opportunity to thank the advancement team for making this day a reality, working behind the scene, reminding us of the importance of this particular day. And to all of them, we say thank you. And also to thank Dr. Kasibe for coordinating this particular event, interacting with the panelists, and in seeing to it that the logistics and that the event flows quite beautifully well. We thank you, sir, for that. Before I allow all of you to sign out, I'd like to bring you to our attention that our advancement team is publicizing the following exhibitions. The Jelly World exhibition, which was officially opened this month or launched this month at the South African Museum. Framing Landscapes exhibition, which is at the National Gallery. Earth Day, which is at the South African Museum. Talking Heads and Heritage, which will be at the South African Museum. Men of Dignity, which will be at the Slave Lodge. And there are a number of virtual exhibitions that we have, or online exhibitions that we have. Boenstra exhibition, Tata Madiba exhibition, Samuel Makonyane exhibition. But most interestingly, there is an exhibition titled Enduring COVID. That is a must-see exhibition virtually. I invite you also to have a look at it and have a look at our social media platform so that you are able to engage with this interesting exhibition. To all our participants today, we thank you for your participation, for the questions that you've posed, the comments that you've raised. And if you like also to comment to us and advise us on where you would like us to improve please contact our advancement department. Their details are in our website. Program Director, with those few words, I would like to thank all persons who participated during this particular discussion, and also those who are following the engagement online via our social media platforms. We thank you, and we look forward to interacting with you again on the 27th of April. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ndlovu, for those encouraging words. Colleagues, I think we're done. Maybe just one last point to say that apologies on behalf of Mr. Hilton Arnolds, who asked that I apologize that he wasn't able to connect here today. And I would like to ask also if we could all put our cameras on, those who can. It's not a must. We would like to take a screenshot. This is for, for record purposes. So if you can, but if you can't, it's still okay. I want to see those beautiful smiles there this morning, this afternoon. I can see we are so beautiful this afternoon. So I will get an indication. I see the cameras are coming on. This is awesome. So I will get an indication from our team if they are done with taking a screenshot of our faces. And whilst we are waiting for that process, also I'm told that Bahia is bringing another important point to say that the biography of Charlotte Maxeke is available at Social History Library, so that we can get more details about how she would have responded to the challenges that we face. So you are free to visit and to get that book. I think that's it. I don't know if advancement team, if you guys are done, so that I can say goodbye to everyone. Yeah, so I think that's it. We are done. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice weekend. Enjoy and keep safe. Please put your masks on, observe COVID-19 regulations, and observe all protocols. Thank you very much. And I think we must also commend, to reiterate the fact that Iziko really is doing a great job in opening this space of engagement. And I must say, Commissioner, we really do accept the proposition that we should collaborate with your institution. I think that we really welcome that. We will definitely be in contact with you. And thank you, everyone. Have a nice day. Keep well, keep safe, observe COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you for an excellent event.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. It was good to see you, Wandile and Stebele.
Thank you. Thanks, Pam. It's good to see you too.
Thank you.
Okay, see you. Bye, everyone. Keep well. All right.
Sono setu, sono